Congrats on landing your first coding bootcamp interview. You're now moving ahead in the admissions process and you're that much closer to breaking into tech. But landing the interview is just half of the battle. You'll still need to impress the admissions staff and demonstrate that you've got what it takes to succeed. And truthfully, it can be pretty nerve-wracking to be under the microscope during your interview. But thankfully, there are a few major steps you can take to prepare and train yourself to ace the interview. In this video, we'll cover everything you need to know about coding bootcamp interview questions and process. So let's begin. So the first question is, how do you prepare for your coding bootcamp interview process? First and foremost, it's very important to do your research. Each coding bootcamp is different and each program has its own standards and requirements. You should research your bootcamp, its program length, placement rates, and the structure of the program, because no two bootcamps are alike. But don't just go looking for a cheat sheet. Instead, read up on your bootcamp's mission and values. Also, it's time to begin asking yourself some questions such as, why are you interested in coding? What are your career goals? And where do you want to end up when you graduate? And though questions like these aren't technical, you'll still want to prepare to answer them during your interview, since the majority of coding bootcamp interviews will be more about you and your intent than your current practical skill level. Once you've done some research and self-examination, it's time to prepare to face some of the challenges you could encounter during the interview. So here are a few tips to help you ace that coding bootcamp interview while you're in the hot seat. Tip number 1, show your interest and motivation. A successful coding career requires your full and complete commitment. You won't thrive in this career if coding is just something you do because it seems interesting or simply want to build a website or an app. Don't be afraid to show your passion for coding. Tell your interviewer what drew you to this field. Tip number 2, share your previous experiences. If you've tried learning to code in the past, discuss your experience with the interviewer. Tell them what you've learned, the tutorials you've done, and how you were successful. Don't be afraid to mention challenges and how you overcame them. And if you never tried coding before, don't worry. Instead, discuss how you learned to play a sport or an instrument or other challenges you've taken in the past. Doing so can really help make an impression that shows your ability to follow rules and guidelines to achieve your goal. Tip number 3, communicate and show that you can be part of a team. You might think that coders are glued to screens for hours on end. This perception couldn't be further from truth. Although much of the development work is independent, you'll still need to be a good communicator and be part of a team that's building the website or the app. So by demonstrating that you're a team player who can communicate effectively, you'll show the interviewer that you'll be able to add value to any team. Tip number 4, be optimistic and positive. It's no secret the entire coding bootcamp process can be extremely draining, especially if you're new to coding. Coding careers will push your limits, so it's easy to bring all that stress and frustration into your interview. However, it's important to remain positive and optimistic during this time. You want your interviewer to know that you will stay calm and focused even during the most challenging of times. Because let's face it, no matter how well you code, there's no way you'll be immune to bugs and other headache-inducing programming problems. Tip number 5, don't show any entitlement. Truth can be hard to swallow, and the truth is coding bootcamp interviews are challenging in more than one way. No matter how confident you are in your coding skills or your ability to learn, always stay humble. Show your interest, show your willingness to learn, as well as your capabilities, but don't expect any guarantees. Tip number 6, answer all the questions. Your interviewer will probably ask you a lot of questions, and it's important not to brush them off. Answer each question fully and in the best way that you can. Use storytelling or anecdotes to get your points across. Often interviewers ask questions about your work habits and how you plan on allocating your time between school and work. It's important to consider the nuances of attending an intensive program like a coding bootcamp, and the interviewers will often expect you to have given it a lot of thought. So think about your living expenses, commute times, and other commitments before you attend the interview. Often, interviewers will ask you questions about your work habits and how you plan on allocating your time between school and work. It's important to consider the nuances of attending an intensive program like a coding bootcamp and the interviewers will want to see that you've given this some thought before. So think about your living expenses, your commute times, and other commitments before the interview. Tip number 7, be prepared to explain why you want to become a coder. No matter which coding bootcamp you're being interviewed for, you will certainly be asked, why do you want to get into this field? As we touched on earlier, make sure you have a well thought out answer that really shows your intent and desire to be successful in the world of coding. Tip number 8, be on time. Honestly, this should be a no-brainer. You'll be surprised how many people show up late or don't show up at all for an interview. If your interview is in person, plan on getting there earlier than the interviewer. If you're meeting on video conferencing, make sure you check your camera and your microphone before joining. Having the mentality, if you're not early, you're late, will bring you a long way. So the interview is over, now what? Once the interview is over, you'll probably be relieved. Now it's time for you to hang tight and wait to hear back from your coding bootcamp. I recommend, feel free to shoot a thank you note just to show your interest and appreciation for the time that the interviewer took to sit down with you. Comment below if you have any questions about coding bootcamp interview process, and let's break in.